Hey, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to share with you why budgeting can be a huge waste of time. Stay tuned. All right, so if you've at all been looking at financial articles, videos, you probably have noticed or come across people talking about budgeting. You got to budget. You got to know what your budget is. Budgeting. So I think that when you look at budgeting, you have to first understand what is the point or purpose behind budgeting. Before you even say, hey, I have to budget. It's kind of like saying, hey, I need to go ahead and get this surgery to replace my knee. Well, you got to understand, well, why would you do that surgery, right? So in this case, why would you budget? So if you look at budgeting from the perspective of what is budgeting and what use is it to you, the question is it a target, a goal, or is it something to predict your returns, or maybe to know where your money is going? These are kind of the main things that people look at to budget. Hey, is it this, that, or something else? Is it something to predict my returns? Well, most of the time, no, it's not, because it's not going to predict your returns or what you're going to make in the future. Budget cannot tell you that. A budget is merely a reflection. So what you're looking at here is that many people, they use the budget for something that it's not set up for, or something that it's not meant to do. They're hoping that it can project, hey, well, what can I spend later on? Maybe you could go ahead and see some of those things where you're spending a lot, but really it's just a reflection of those spending habits, so you can really see the bigger picture. So what I want you to really recognize is that in terms of budgeting, is that it is a huge time and effort in order to go ahead and budget. If you go ahead and spend the time to budget every single month, it's expensive in terms of your time and energy. So that's one big thing to consider. And if you're one of the people that are more minimalist or living below your means, if you live below your means, budgeting may be a huge waste of time. So I want you to think about that for a minute. If you're making, let's say, $200,000 a year, but you live in a $30,000 home, you drive a $3,000 car, maybe even walk to work, you don't spend a lot on groceries, you live by yourself, you don't have kids that you have to take care of, you might not need to budget. What's the point of budgeting if you're making $200,000 a year and you're spending only $25,000 a year? There's probably no point in budgeting. You're just wasting your time, especially if your life is systematic, it's consistent, you know your expenses and so on and so forth. Where budgeting can be a huge benefit is if you have no clue where your spending is, if your spending is out of control, if you're in credit card debt. All of those things can be a huge benefit to budgeting. So some things that you need to consider is that, hey, do I know where my recurring expenses are? Because these can be a huge waste of money. So if you're in there and you're paying for things and you see, hey, my credit card bill's going up. Well, I don't know where it's going. I don't know where the money is. Well, if you have recurring expenses that you've signed up for 10 or 20 different things where you're paying month after month after month, and you're just not using those things, then those recurring expenses can add up in a huge, big way. So that's one big thing to consider. The other thing to consider is, what are your big financial goals and expenses? So when you look at a budget, it's not going to project and telegraph, hey, what your final returns are going to be. But if you have a certain goal, like let's say you have a savings goal, a budget could help you do those things. A budget could also share with you, hey, your big expenses. So if you've got a big car expense that's going to be coming up soon, or that just happened, a budget can show you and reflect that, hey, that's where the money went. Or, hey, I probably will need to buy a new car soon, so I need to budget for that, or have a little bit of extra nest egg to be able to make that happen. So that's another good point behind a budget. If you look at also the room in your budget for those unintended expenses, for those emergency funds, is there room or wiggle room in that budget? So for things like emergency funds, for things like loss of jobs, anything that happens out of the ordinary, you got to have some wiggle room in your budget. Because if you have some unintended consequences and expenses that come up, then your budget's got to have a little bit of wiggle room. If you live kind of, if you're the person making $20,000 and you're spending $19,999, there's no wiggle room. There's not enough wiggle room to make things happen. You can't invest things, you can't save things. There's just not enough wiggle room for anything that happens. If your car breaks down on the side of the road and you need a new tire, you don't have room. You don't have the financial survivability to make it happen. So that's why it's important to consider if there's wiggle room within your budget. So keep in mind what a budget does is it reflects on what's you're spending. They don't make changes, nor can they project into the future. If you're looking for making changes, this is all about changing your values and human behavior rather than trying to tweak the budget to making it work. If you could change your behavior, you're going to be way better off than trying to tweak your numbers a little bit. Because if you can, hey, stop buying a $10 coffees every single week, that's going to start adding up. If you can go ahead and stop buying very expensive cars and maybe go to used cars, if you can stop spending monthlies on recurring subscription fees, like maybe, not going to mention any companies, but those that you pay monthly for television services or even cell phone bills, if you can lower your plans rather than from paying premium data plans, if you can go ahead and use those datas maybe at the house or maybe cut the data a little bit smaller so that way you're not spending as much on your plan. All these things could help curb those expenses, and that could make it a lot better because that budget is there to reflect for you. It's there so you can see, hey, what changes do I need to make so that way I could go ahead and change my life a little bit. But they can't project into the future. They can't tell you, hey, what is this going to really mean for you into the future? And that is better suited for a financial planner. So for example, if let's say you go ahead and invest in schooling and maybe that's killing your budget, you're paying, let's say $2,000, $5,000 every semester and you're killing on your schooling and hey, it blows up your budget. You might say, hey, that's okay. From a budget perspective, it says it's not good. From your perspective, that might be fine because it's an investment in you and a budget can't see that and telegraph that saying, hey, I'm doing this over the next 5 years so that way I could get a great degree and earn 3 times as much as what I'm making right now. So anyways, these are some of the big things to consider when looking at a budget. And that's why it's a waste of time. If you can get yourself to live below your means and big time below your means, you should need to budget because then your life will be kind of systematic and you've got enough cushion. If you're tight, and you're always kind of tight within your range of spending, then yes, of course, you will need to budget to understand where are my expenses going. If you have no clue where your expenses are going, you need to budget. You need to understand where are things going. But once you have your routine, your spending is kind of similar month after month, week after week, then that budgeting starts to become a little bit of a waste of time. If you're dealing within the business, yeah, you got to know where the expenses go because you got to file taxes. But on a personal level, if let's say you're making $500,000 a year, do you really have to worry about the $5 coffee? No, you don't. So anyways, my point is that if you're brand new, if you're in debt, if you got problems financially, you probably need to do a couple of budgets for a few months to make sure you're on track and get your spending in order. Once you can get your habits in order and you can do them time and time again, then you should be fine. You don't need to budget because it requires a lot of time and energy. Yes, there are some people that'll say, hey, you got to budget monthly, you got to do it. But again, if you're living below your means, does it really make sense to? You be the judge. Anyways, thanks for joining me in this video. I hope you found it helpful. Feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're brand new. Other than that, enjoy the week ahead, and I will see you next time.